folks, in this video I'll be talking about the rendering of 3D models. SketchUp is a very good tool for creating 3D models, very quick and easy to use, excellent for beginners. I'm sure a lot of you will find it very useful. But there is one small issue with SketchUp. The images do not always look quite the way you want them to. Let's have a look at this SketchUp model of a Valkyra. SketchUp has done a very good job of allowing me to create a detailed, complex object, and it renders the image of the model on screen in a semi-realistic way. We have the proportions, angles and perspectives represented perfectly, and the textures are also rendered pretty well, with a sort of diffuse lighting effect which does not cast any shadows, but it does make the lower surfaces a little darker than the upper ones. It's a good general rendering, but it doesn't look very realistic. Now, you may not want realistic. If you draw your characters in a way that's not highly realistic, it would be jarring to have backdrops or other objects alongside them that look very much of a different style. However, if you want to add a bit more realism than SketchUp can offer, you need to use a different type of software, something called rendering software. The one I use is called Blender. Like SketchUp, you can use it to create 3D models from scratch, and it also produces highly detailed rendered images of these models. In some cases they look exactly like photographs. However, Blender is much more complex to use. It's much more complicated and it takes much longer to create the models. If you have the time and patience to learn everything it has to offer, I'm sure you'll produce some amazing images. But if, like me, you're a bit lazy, you might be thinking, is there a way to combine the easiness of SketchUp with the beauty of Blender? And the answer is yes. Go to SketchUp and File, Export 3D Model. Pick a location to save, and from the drop-down list select the format Collada. Then Export. Now open Blender. This little flash box will appear. Just click off it on the workspace behind to start. Here you see a very simple cube half immersed in a grid. Also, you have these three coloured arrows which should look familiar to you. Blue for height, red and green for depth and width. If we go over here and click the render button, we'll see what the camera is seeing. Here it is, a rather dull cube, but the shading is very interesting. The top of the cube is lighter than the right hand side because the light source is above the cube. The third face, which is pointed away from the light, is totally dark. Why is it totally black? Because in this micro universe there is nothing except the cube, the light and the camera. There's nothing to reflect the light back towards the third face. Now let's delete this cube and put our own model in. Press Escape to go back to the workspace. Press X on your keyboard and delete. Now File, Import, Collada. Go to the folder where you exported the Collada from SketchUp, and here it is. It has the same name as the SketchUp file, but the extension is a .dae. Double click and Blender imports it in. If the model's not centered, you need to reposition it. Click the colored arrows here to move the model towards the center of the grid where the cube used to be. This is where your camera is currently focused. Now let's click Render. Here's your model with a very realistic lighting style. You can see different shades of texture plus totally black shadows, just like we saw on the cube. This is quite a small image though. Let's change the resolution here from 50% to 100%. Just click, type 100, press enter, then render again. Press escape to exit, and let's have a look at this from a different angle. With these arrows I can change the position of the model, but it's much easier to change the position of the camera. Use the blue arrow handle to bring it up or down just a little. Render again and you'll see a different view. If I want to do more than move up and down, I have to move the camera using the red and green arrows, but you can't really see them properly from this angle, so you need to change the viewpoint. In Blender this is pretty easy. If you're using a Mac, then scrolling freely allows you to rotate your viewpoint in any direction. To zoom in and out, hold down Ctrl while scrolling backwards or forwards. To pan, up or down, left or right, hold down Shift while scrolling around. With a normal mouse, use the middle button. scroll to zoom in and out, click and hold while moving the mouse to orbit, control and scroll for left and right, shift and scroll for up and down. Okay, so let's go above the craft and get an aerial view. Use the blue arrow to move it up, then move the viewpoint higher up as well. I want to make sure that the camera is pointing in the right direction. And because this is a 3D space, I have to shift my viewpoint in all three of those dimensions. Okay, if I look at the camera and its target from the side, I can see that the camera is pointing towards the front of the craft, missing most of it. Let's render it and see. Yes, we're just getting the front end. Okay, escape to go back. I want to change the position and the angle of the camera. First, let's pull it up a bit higher because it was a bit too close. Now let's point the camera down. To do this, I first change my viewpoint so that I'm looking at the camera straight from the side. I do this by lining my viewpoint up so that the camera looks two-dimensional. Now I know I'm level with it. Now I place the mouse pointer in front of the camera, in the middle, and press R for rotate. Now move the mouse pointer towards the centre of the target. The camera will follow. Render again and you have your new angle. But what if I want to straighten the image? I have to rotate the camera in a perpendicular angle. To do that, go to View, Cameras, Set Active Object as Camera. Now you get a preview image of what the camera is seeing. This is very useful. To rotate, press R and just move the mouse. Now you can see what the render will look like before you do the actual rendering. This is also useful if you're working with a very complex model, because the rendering itself might take longer. Okay, so that covers the basics. I just want to add a couple of pointers. The default background colour is a very neutral grey. Because we're using this just to get the image, we want to make sure we have a nice strong contrast between the background colour and the image itself. So let's change it. Go over here to this tiny little world icon. This box shows you what the colour is at the moment. Click on Horizon to change it. Now you get this colour wheel just like in SketchUp, and if you move the mouse around here you can see the box behind it changing colour as you do so. I'm going to select a strong dark blue to contrast with the gold textures of the Valkyra. Go to the camera icon and render to see the result. To export this image, save image as and give it a name. Let's open that in GIMP, and as you can see it looks exactly like it did in Blender. Let's look at the size too. It's 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels high. That's pretty big, but if you do want it to be bigger you can resize it in GIMP. But it's much better to resize the original exported image. It'll be much better quality. So let's go back to GIMP and change the resolution to 150% or whatever you want it to be. Your rendered image will be much larger, but it'll have the same amount of detail. You can zoom out to see all of it. Another useful tip, when you save this model, make sure you save all of your colours and textures that you originally imported. Blender does not do this by default, so you have to change the settings. If you move or lose the original SketchUp file, your Blender model will be a blank white object. So what you have to do is go to File, External Data, tick this tiny box next to Automatically Pack into Blend. If your model has just one light source, you'll have a very stark, rather dramatic lighting effect. You have these totally black shadows here. If you want to make it look a bit more natural, there's a couple of things you can do. You can add a second light source on the opposite side of the model. So here's your light source, right click to select, then press Shift D to duplicate. Then just move the mouse to reposition the new light source. Let's move it to the opposite side and a little bit lower. I also want to move it a little bit further away so that it's not as strong as the main light. Render again and you can see that the shadows are not so dark. You can also change the strength of the light. If you click on this box here that says light, and you can see the field shows you the energy of the light. The default value is 1. Click and overwrite this, you can increase it or decrease it. 2 will double the brightness, 0.5 will halve it. Press enter, go back to the camera icon and render again. Another way to get a more diffuse lighting effect is to use a different type of light source. First, let's get rid of these standard light sources, which are called point lamps. Right click, X, then click on delete. Now go to create and under lamps choose Hemi. Render that to see how it looks. With this type of lamp you get no shadows at all. Okay, one last point. This is a little time-saving tip. If you like Blender and you're going to use it a lot, it makes sense to have all of your preferences built into it every time you open it. Every time you open Blender, it'll give you this default workspace with the cube. Let's make our own default. Delete the cube, X, click delete. Change the background color. Change resolution to 100%. Let's tell it to automatically save all our textures. Now I'm going to save this and call it 000 default. And I'm going to keep this in my 3D folder. Now each time I want to use Blender, I will open this file before I import a model into it. That way all of my preferred settings will be there straight away. That's all for now. There's a lot more to Blender. Like I said, it's very complex and all I've done here is barely scratch the surface. But these are the main points of how I use it to create images for my comic. I'll come back to Blender in later videos to show you some other cool things it can do. But for now, just play around with it, get a feel for it and see what it can do. Thanks for watching. See you soon.